Hello, welcome to A Crypt Full of Funny Bones, panel about combining humor and horror. My name is Stephanie Allen. I am one half of Charm Person Games. We are a professional game master service for hire based out of Baltimore. And I'll have my other panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with Rick, because on my screen, he's to my left.
Oh, hey everybody, I am Rick Wheeler with Gehenna Gaming, one of the co-founders, and I am extremely happy to be here with these fantastic panelists.
Okay, Ify.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Ify Nwadiwe. Actor, writer, comedian, do lots of live plays, love video games. I've started just calling myself a professional nerd.
Why not?
Sure. Sasha, if you'd like to go next.
Hi, I'm Sasha Sienna. So I am the founder and games designer with MacGuffin and Company, tabletop role-playing game company. I am a comedy writer, and I also play Georgie in a horror podcast called The Magnus Archives. And I think
Awesome.
I'm definitely going to have to start stealing that and calling myself a professional nerd, because I feel like that really sums it up. That's a good tip.
Yeah, I think it's what we're going to do too. Natalie?
Hi, I'm Natalie Pudim. I'm the other half of Charm Person Games. You can find me on Twitter at Natalie_20 spelled out. And I also run a local women and non-binary D&D meetup called Critical Misses in Baltimore.
And Jacob.
Hi, my name is Jacob Burgess. I'm currently having some incredibly wonderful camera problems. I'm a voice actor. I am a games writer. I'm an internet comedian and the director of operations for a game publisher called Yizrid Games. And I assure you, quite handsome, even though you can't see that.
Excellent. So we're going to start at the panel, but I do just want to give a shout out real quick. So you do know that there are raffles going off every hour. This hour, the raffle is for a 2-hour session booked with me or Natalie through Charm Person Games. So put that money in there, get to win a session with us. And also, just so you know, anyone who can show us the receipt for any kind of donation or purchase that you do during VirtualHorror Con will also get $50 off of any session they book with us. CharmPersonGames.com. All right, and now for our panel. So the big question is, why would you combine humor and horror?
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I mean, that's my answer, but...
Yeah, no, I think humor and horror traditionally have always gone together, like especially in a lot of horror movies, you kind of like split the horror and trauma of that with like light moments and kind of a breather and funny moments. You know, some of the best, I think, horror movies have lots of humor in it, you know, from like Freddy Krueger's like witty lines and like your comic relief, and let's not even get started on Scream.
Yeah, I'd say that actually I think it's more than why wouldn't you. I think that both horror and humor, when they're mixed, they can actually really enhance each other. Like, especially humor is all about juxtaposition, right? And horror and humor are almost like two ends of a spectrum. So when you have that juxtaposition built in, it just enhances everything. I think you can really highlight the horror by bringing in some light-hearted moments that show the humanity of the people that these horrible things are actually happening to. And I think for me, some of the funniest films in the world are the ones that kind of really look closely at the surrealism of like looking at horror in a very non-traditional way, you know, like Shaun of the Dead or What We Do in the Shadows. Like they take that horror trope and they juxtapose it with like really small everyday things. I just think it's so funny. So yeah, I think they really go quite well together, actually.
Yes, that, and you know, when you are having a game that's meant to be in the genre of horror and you have these light human moments, you ride this wave of like a roller coaster of emotions, and the ones that you express that are not horrific, that are not thrilling, they make the moments that are tense and are horrific stand out even more. It's just much more impactful. I really like what you said, Sasha, about how they're both a juxtaposition on what is normal. I think that's a really good point.
And when you're dealing with like life-threatening horror in particular, oh hey, we got Jacob.
Hi.
But when you're dealing with like life-threatening horror in particular, I find that like as a game master, bringing in like funny, lighthearted elements early on brings the whole party together very quickly. And then when you jeopardize that with like something terrifying, it makes people care about each other and not just worry about, you know, am I going to win this game, but is, you know, my friend going to make it out of this alive? It builds those bonds much quicker.
Yeah. And it works for NPCs as well. If you introduce like some bumbling, silly, like gangly 19-year-old kid who can barely function, and then suddenly you put them in horrific danger, like the players care so much more, and they want to not just get through this encounter, but get through it in a way that is going to preserve that NPC, which makes it more difficult for them and more interesting for you as a GM as well.
Yeah. How I use it in my games, and this is really weird because I thought we were going to be talking about Drake's funny bones in this panel, but how I use it in my games is to prevent, which is weird. Normally my camera's right here, so I'm going to be looking like that. It's right there. So how I generally use it in my games is to help prevent fatigue. Is you need those moments of tension. Like if you are just like dragging your players with proper consent and everything, just through the, can I swear?
Yeah.
Through the shit. You want those moments. It doesn't necessarily even have to be in game, but just allowing the players to be like, hey, wouldn't it be funny? Or like, imagine if outside of the game, like, you know, so you keep the in-game tension, but you have a moment where, like, if you're just doing it like for 3 8-hour sessions or whatever, you have that one moment of levity that kind of like prevents everybody from just getting fatigued, so that, as you were saying before, to keep those moments like impactful and to keep that tension and everything, you want, you know, you need a little bit of salt in your brownies to kind of, you know, in this case, salt is the humor and the brownies is the shit. That was weird. Don't eat shit brownies, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I wanted to hop off that because one thing, you know, combining that and what Sasha was saying is they kind of use the same foundation, because I think one of my favorite, you know, kind of methods of comedy is like the misdirect. And that's also something you use in horror, so they can be layered. And it almost adds to the suspense, because is the misdirect going to be something funny, or is it going to be us dying? So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And the oh, I'm sorry. Did somebody else want to?
I was just going to say, I think that idea of misdirection like can really enhance either the humor or the horror. Like if you are so tense because you're expecting something horrific to be the thing that's coming out of nowhere, it makes that laughter, that burst of laughter, just so much stronger, because that release of that tension just feels so good. But equally, if you're expecting a joke and something just hits you out of left field, it can really it can really hit you quite horrifically. Like it can show how, because I think we can get a little bit get a little bit kind of numb to certain horror tropes, especially if you play with them a lot. And I think if you're expecting something wholesome or funny or friendly in some way, then it can give those tropes the same kind of tension and the same weight that they have maybe the first few times you experience them.
Yeah. This is a topic that I love very much, because horror writers and people that engage in horror are often very funny, and comedians have fucked up brains. Like you build the same thing out of, like, horror is made sometimes from trauma and hardship. Same thing with comedy. You're building two very different feelings and very different stuff out of the same shit. Like I went through something horrible as an example. I'm not like, this isn't the therapy session. But you know, if somebody goes through something horrible, it's either they deal with it by writing something really fucked up or writing something really fucked up and funny.
Yeah, I always love the idea that the best definition we've ever been able to come up for, like, what is humor, why are things funny, like that's something that we struggle with like all the time. Is if something strikes you unexpectedly, something unexpected happens and your reaction is to laugh at it. We don't really know why, but fear is the same way. You don't know what's going to happen, you don't know what to expect, and you know they'll just say like fear of the unknown is the oldest fear of humanity. So that something unknown, unexpected is happening, and you can either laugh at it or you can be horrified by it. And they're just basically two sides. It's just two different reactions to the same stimuli, which I find fascinating.
Yep.
They
Is
can
this
both.
backwards?
It's about backwards.
No, it's correct, or at least
Okay,
looks correct to me.
I was gonna say they're both kind of like a loss of control as well. Like something can jump at you, scare you, or just the tension of a horrific moment where you know something's coming, or you have that subtle fear that grows and builds until it's like an outright panic. The same thing happens with humor. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation, the collective you, where you're in a place where it has to be completely serious, like a courtroom, but then someone gets on the stand and they're not trying to be funny, but it's hilarious. And you have to keep it in, and you're like, you think you're gonna like explode. Those are both weird human reactions where it's a loss of personal control. Your body's just doing something. And I love that cat. That's adorable.
Sorry, cat.
Sorry, but that cat's so distractingly cute.
He's been on camera every chance
It's
he's
very
had.
upset. And wants to
So to my point, if a nice cat on the screen as well can be something you can't have control of.
So I think we pretty well covered the salty sweet kind of idea of having humor and horror together, enhancing each other. So how do you do that? How do you bring humor into your horror story? It's hard to be funny.
One thing I really like to do as a DM is to have villains that like really kind of revel in scaring the party. Like it's fun for them because it's also fun for me as a DM. So it's very easy to channel that mindset. And that always makes it like a little bit sillier, a little more playful. And I think that comes through to the party. Recently in my D&D campaign, in our D&D campaign I run for Critical Misses, it's slightly horror themed in that the antagonist of the campaign is the god of fear. And he sends avatars out that the party has to fight. And one of those avatars was a elephant like corpse like stitched together, and it was full of mice dressed as tiny clowns because it was my clown themed adventure. And just like that like total unexpectedness of they like finally like break this elephant and then mice pour out was like, it was just thinking of like the thing where if I was really going to mess with someone, what I do, it just hit that note of being like both funny and scary at the same time.
Did your
Yeah,
players
definitely
laugh?
like playing with the absurd, I think is a really good point there. Like, you have your typical, you're in a dark tavern underground, there's a lizard-clad thief hunched over in the corner, and she's like sucking on a rainbow-colored lollipop that's as big as her face. Like it's weird, it's absurd, but like it's also kind of scary because she's clearly dangerous at the same time. That kind of thing. I think like really just taking one element to where you think it's gonna go and then just drop in just like a little bit of absurdity.
Yeah, or one elephant in this case.
For sure, I think. Oh, sorry, go on. No, after you.
No, I'm gonna be right here.
Light off.
Ah, nice. Everybody's just like, no, you do it.
I'm
All
British,
right,
I should
Sasha,
have the
you
upper hand
speak.
in this one.
Sasha, you speak.
Okay. Yeah, I think for sure, like surrealism is something that is so present in both humor and horror that it is always a great place, especially to start. If you're not used to mixing horror and humor, I think surrealism is a really good place to start, especially like taking one element and just making it absurd. For me, I think both horror and humor undercut each other. So the danger is always that if you don't know which one your primary tone is, the danger is that neither of them are going to really successfully land because they'll always be just batting each other aside. So I think for me, the thing is to know, are you a funny but ultimately scary GM or in a game, or is this a comedy game with horror as its kind of setting, as its genre setting, and making sure that you're using the either the funnier elements, the more absurd elements as you're kind of flavoring, but then ramping up the horror through, because that works so well, because you get this kind of false sense of like, it's friendly, it's nice, it's fine, we're all having a good time. And obviously, as long as your players know that it's going to be going off in a direction, it can make that direction just land so much harder. And if you're going for the other direction, if you want something where the horror tropes of the setting, it builds up that tension and then makes that punchline land so much harder at the end. So I think it's always about picking one as your primary aim and ramping up that one towards the climax of your game.
I'm sorry, Ify?
Oh,
Ify,
yeah,
did
no,
you want to
yeah.
say what you wanted to say now?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's very interesting, just in regards to horror and just my relationship with tabletop games. You know, I was a little Nigerian American boy who went to Catholic school. So we got a nice pamphlet that said D&D was the work of the devil. So I never I didn't get into D&D until like I was I think I had to be like 18, 19, and I was already doing improv comedy. So like tabletop and comedy are like, for me, one and the same, because, and that was the funny thing when you know, tabletop started slowly taking over UCB, the not UC Berkeley, Upright Citizens Brigade, the comedy theater out here, is because everyone playing a tabletop game is just doing improv comedy. And I say all that to lay the layer in. That's a very, like Sasha laid something very important, because there are like two different styles of horror. And I find that if you're going for the serious horror, the more funny and absurd you get, the more stakes have to come with the horror. So it's kind of like, I think of like Green Room, if anyone's seen that movie, which I loved, which was a Survive the Night, which had funny moments, but then when shit got real, it got so very real to remind you. And I think that's kind of like the tool of comedy, is to like add levity, but also to really make that horror that you're about to introduce hit harder, and, you know, and really be like, oh, you know, we're having fun, but the stakes here are very real. I think I played that, got that with Outbreak Undead, which was like very unforgiving. And I, you know, typically most of my characters tend to be goofy, mostly because like, that's just how I am. If I'm going through something, if something's scary, I just lean into comedy. I start making lots of jokes. You know, this is just how a survival mechanism. You know, like, you know, growing up.
Good game tonight.
Yeah. You know, like I just I'm like, okay, things are getting scary, I'm gonna just be funnier. But then it just, when something happens or when a character dies, then you get that very real moment of your brain clicks into mode, just like, okay, it's time to get serious. And people, it's always interesting when you have the like goofy funny character get serious, because then anyone watching is like, oh, this is very serious because this guy's not making jokes anymore.
Yeah. Or when you have the ultra serious like deadpan character like just make this sarcastic comment and then walk away, and it's just like, the fuck.
They used to do that on Next Gen all the time, where like Worf would say something ridiculous and then the episode would end and you're just like, what?
And that's how I got the prune juice poops. Roll
and
credits.
then the other way in Deep Space Nine, where like they'd have Miles be the funny comic relief character, but when they wanted you to be like, oh shit, they'd have something really horribly traumatic happen to Miles.
Yeah,
it was in the show Bible that once a season Miles had to suffer.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Legitimately.
That explains so much.
Because that does bring up a good point on how you can use humor in your games, especially if you have a very well liked quippy NPC. You can have horrible things happen to them, or you can play with the trope and have nothing bad happen to them the entire time, but threaten it the whole game. I'm a bad person.
Good company, though.
I think I'm in the right place.
I really like the idea. If you are someone who's comfortable kind of changing your game on the fly, if you can like be nimble and think on your feet like that, if you throw something out that's meant to be horrifying and it fails, like your players barely react to it, now it's comedy. You know, if it wasn't scary, well, now suddenly the person who was doing the thing, you know, jumped out of the tomb, you know, in one of our games, Dracula popped out of a tube, and one of our players one-shotted Dracula through the chest with a laser gun. Now that's funny. It was scary when we were crawling through this dungeon and this horrific vampire shows up, but then they shot him, and now it's funny, kind of thing. Just you can recover from that and play into that, and that can be a way for you to bring some humor into your otherwise horror game.
Ooh.
And a hush falls over the crowd.
Yeah.
How about some tips for people who maybe come from a horror background? I think is probably a lot of our audience here used to horror tabletop gaming. How do they learn these kinds of skills? How do they find what's funny and try and pull those elements into their game? What advice would you give for them?
Oh, the eternal question. How do I be funny?
Yeah.
I have a strategy that I think is really hard to screw up on this one, actually. And it is to really, really, really zoom in to people's tiny everyday lives and how they're impacted. So I think that films are something that does this really well. I mentioned Shaun of the Dead and What We Do in the Shadows. I like Shaun of the Dead is so funny because yes, zombie apocalypse movies are all focused on the people who are trying to solve the zombie apocalypse or get a bunch of people to safety. And when you really zoom in and think, okay, what is an ordinary person going to do? What's the most everyday thing that you can think of in this situation? It is going to the pub. And it's just really everyday, mundane concerns, but at this backdrop of apocalyptic stuff going on. That's always funny, and it's really easy to do.
Yeah, definitely those reactions that might be inappropriate or unexpected to things is a great way to you can lean towards, why aren't you running? Why aren't you packing up and getting out of town? Okay, well, it doesn't faze you. Play into that absurdity again.
It's almost like the opposite of what we're always taught to do, which is almost like it's to lower the stakes in a way rather than raise them.
Yeah.
I find that I think maybe even by accident, I always try to make the players be the stars. So in my mind, I automatically go to, if they're the stars, then the NPCs that are not major NPCs are all just kind of losers. So I do a lot of self-deprecating humor where I have characters that are just awful. and I just deadpan it sometimes, where she's like, yep, and that's just my life, and for some reason that gets really funny.
Oh, and you're running the game later. If you taking notes?
Yeah. Got it.
These guys are getting an inside.
Yeah.
They're mental note.
The stars. All right.
When no, you are. You absolutely are, and every player is. But now you're going to be like, this guy at the gate, he's probably a loser. We can probably get something over on him.
Sasha, I really like that point, because it really ties into what you said earlier about absurdity. And sometimes absurdity is easy. It's just doing the thing that is unexpected, or in an extraordinary circumstance, the mundane becomes absurd. That's fucking awesome.
Yeah. With me, I'm just gonna bounce off that. But when you talk about implementing horror in tabletop, then you're just gonna get me right into my improv theory, which is just simple. I think first thing, if you're wondering, oh, should you do something funny? Should you do something? Trust the players at the table with you. We're all trying to build a great story. If you want to try something, try it, and if it falls flat, hey, you'll be roasted at drinks later. But I think always feel comfortable enough to try things, because obviously this is an idea for the story that you want to build on. And I think one thing I like about the Shaun of the Dead example is knowing that it's a simple idea that just ends up being so absurd as the stakes around them get higher. And I think that's something to go in when you want to have a character into something like that. You don't want to put a hat on a hat. You don't want them always wanting to do the wacky thing.
Yep.
But you have to always ground it and justify it. The reason that Shaun wanted to go to the pub is because he felt that it was the most secure. And many times in the movie, he broke down why it was the most secure. So he wasn't just going to the pub because he wanted to drink. He was like, this is in my head. No one's thinking about it, but this is the most secure place in this town. And we'll be able to lock up. We'll have a gun. It's great. And if you can get your character to have that kind of justification, you can you can make your plan wanting to go to the moon, because if your character has the means, the idea, and a grounded reason why they want that to happen, then you can go a full game just riding that same wave. And that's kind of how, like, and I'm big on relationships. Like, I like, if the comedy is going to come where, like, the first thing I'm doing, you'll see this tonight, Jacob, is just seeing where our PCs stand and how we view each other and once I know that, then I know just bits that I'm gonna just have with everyone, because everyone, just like in real life, we all talk to each other in different ways. We all want different things from each other.
Yep.
And so with that, that's where the real comedy is going to lie, because that's also the second piece of comedy. We talked about misdirection, absurdity, but also relatability. Sometimes that's the funniest thing, is when a PC does something that they're like, oh, I would have done that.
Yeah. So if I can bounce off that too, because to tie all of that into, if you're used to running something like horror based, how do you bring more comedy into it? I've been doing improv for quite some time, and something that we're often told, depending on the style of improv that you do, is that if something is funny 25% of the time, you win. You did it, because that's what people are going to remember. They're not going to remember all the chances that you took that may have completely freaking bombed. They're going to remember the funny moments, and that's what they're going to take away, because you're trying to leave someone with a feeling, not necessarily a memory.
Oh, yeah.
One thing I find difficult in combining humor and horror is, I think that it is where you can run into things where you end up with people safety tooling when you take something very serious and scary and make it a joke.
Yep.
And I think that it also takes a pretty good read on your table to be able to take something horrific and treat it as funny, when your players might legitimately be scared and then think you're not responsible for their fear.
You can be funny without trivializing.
Yeah, definitely certain topics are topics you only joke about if you have the right audience. Not that you can't joke about them, because I am a firm believer that you can tell a certain kind of joke about anything, but you gotta know who your audience is, and you gotta build that trust with your other players to be able to joke about certain things.
That's I just always, that's there's something about being a comedian and hearing it's just a joke so much, because there's so much that goes into it. It's knowing your audience, it's your audience also knowing you, because like, there are jokes that would seem totally innocuous that I would say that people would laugh because they're like, oh, you're being sarcastic, because I know that's not something you're into. But also, people tend to do that with things that are sensitive, and it's like, well, if no one knows you, then you have to understand that you saying something horrible is just going to sound like you're a dude saying something horrible.
They're going to think it's your view on the subject.
But I also wanted to talk about, I like that I'm treating this like the Brady Bunch, and also this might not make sense because I realize everyone's grids are different, but for me, it's right here. I wanted to talk about Natalie.
Sure, Jan.
Natalie, that's such a great point, and that's why I always say, like, grounded, because also, like, everyone's telling a story, and it is because you tend to get, with us goofs, you get people who just want to go for the joke, and it's like, well, you first have to honor the story being told, and how does this relate? Like, I make jokes if I'm in a scary situation, but I'm also going to react first, and then that's when you're starting to decompress and do that. That's when you get to goof it up. But I think that's a very important thing to note, is like, honor what's going on in the scene, and then the reaction is probably where the comedy is coming from.
Right? Context is queen.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's why, especially when you're running, when you're running any game really, but especially when you're running a horror game where you're going to be bringing in humor, I think it's so important to just make sure that everybody is on the same page before you start about what the tone of the game is, about where you're going to be going. And that doesn't mean that you have 100%. To give any spoilers about what specifics are going to happen, but everybody should be able to have a discussion at the top saying, like, where's the balance between humor and horror that we want to go for? And then as long as you're exactly honoring that, then one of the great things about tabletop role playing is that it's really ephemeral. You can try one thing. If it doesn't work out, okay, great, well, that's done. Like, move on to the next thing. Like Jacob was
Mhm.
saying, people are going to remember the feeling. So I think as long as you're honoring the kind of the game and the discussion that you've had with your players, as long as everybody's on the same page about what the feeling that you're going to come away from it is, I think there's definitely so much room to try stuff in this medium. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's nothing stopping anybody from being like, hey, that didn't work. Can we roll that back and try it a different way? There's nothing like just because it fell out of your mouth doesn't etch it into stone and make it law. Everybody at the table can just be like, yeah, I don't like that guy being purple. Can he be a light purple? Like whatever you want to do, like roll that back. Like just talk to each other in a respectful way. And a lot of the stuff that, especially a lot of the discourse that's been going on like now, is establishing everything ahead of time and making sure that everybody's comfortable communicating in the way that they're comfortable communicating. Everybody should have some sort of an outlet, and safety rules. I know there are golden standards, but you can just talk and you can change what the hell is happening so long as everybody agrees to it.
Yeah, your first safety mechanic is talking, always. No matter what other safety practices you guys have established as a group, if you've had a session 0 and talked about spend or not, your first and best safety tool is always talking to each other. Yes. And I think that this combination of horror and humor, like best practices, is always going to be, your safety tools are even more important than they would be otherwise.
I would maybe shift that a little bit, because sometimes people aren't cool speaking up in the moment. I would say communicating is your best safety tool, because some people can't always, especially when you've got like 4 or 5 people, or if it's like a new group or something like that, and somebody did something just shit-tastic. Some people aren't cool speaking up. So having tools ahead of time, absolutely. It's harder to react with words necessarily, unless at the very beginning everybody has an open dialogue and an open style of communication.
Oh yeah. And that's the key. I say this all the time with relationships, but also tabletop. Just because you set boundaries doesn't mean you can't check in. Always check in, make sure everyone's still fine. Especially, we're not doing this much, but when we're gathered at a table and you can kind of read the body language, you can check in with that person. You can be proactive. You don't have to wait for them to be like, hey, I really didn't feel that. If you feel like you can check in, because sometimes they're like, oh no, I was just kind of leaning into the character, we're good. And then you can have a clear, conscious mind moving forward too.
Yeah. Borders are invisible.
Yeah.
Check in to make sure where the fuck they are. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I can, sorry, I know this is a little bit circling back to something that we said before, but I think, Jacob, what you said about the discourse in tabletop at the moment, I feel like a lot of that discourse is focused on the difference between player agency and character agency, which is obviously something that comes up so much in horror, because in so many horror games, especially like cosmic horror, your characters are going to have no agency or very little. But you still 100% need your players to have their agency.
Absolutely.
Even if it's an emotional agency,
I think humor is, like, to get back to like, why would you use humor in horror? I think using humor in those situations can be such a great way to give players that agency while still telling that story, because giving them the power to joke about that stuff takes away the perceived power for the players of the stuff that you're talking about.
In that moment, I think.
Obviously it's not foolproof, but I think it can be really helpful.
I feel like in those moments it kind of acts like a pressure release valve a little bit. Like it lowers the tension just enough that the check-in like everyone feels comfortable in the check-in, I think sometimes.
Yeah. I use a stupid tool sometimes, like when things are like really, really tense, or like I see maybe somebody's uncomfortable and I don't know if I can just be like, you okay? Because they might still be in that moment of just be like, yeah, okay, cool. Like, so just the stupid tool is just to pause and then have a pre-prepped stupid ass joke. Like, just be like, hey, I just want to stop this for just a moment. What do you call a fish with no eye? Are you doing okay? Like, it's a stupid ass tool, but it gets people out of that moment and hopefully be able to like open up a little bit. Or it redirects what they're feeling and makes them hate you out of the game. That also works because that's still engaging.
That's also useful.
Yes.
It's good that you say that, because you can then read their body language and how, especially if it's something really funny that you're throwing at them like a curveball out of the blue.
Right.
Because if it's something that everyone's laughing at, but the one person isn't, you know that maybe something did go too far, and you do have to redirect.
Right.
So for that reason as well, it's a great indicator to check in.
Yeah. It's just one of the tools, though, because there are some people that do enjoy engaging with this that are, I don't want to fuck up this word, neuroatypical.
Yes, that is the word.
Yes, fuck yeah. All right, good.
Hi, that's me.
I'm learning. Sweet. That can't read body language or have trouble doing that. So, you know, it's good to have a couple of different fallbacks just in case, because sometimes you don't know who's at your table, or you're running it at a con or something, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I'm big on, like,
it's all
talking.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I am someone who struggles with reading body language, and it's even harder in a format like this where we're all playing online right now, and like you're only seeing from like the shoulders up kind of thing.
Yeah.
So like I do things like explicitly tell players, if you don't know anybody, an explanation, and we've all like saying, do we agree to this idea of supporting each other and respecting each other's limits?
Yeah.
Do we agree to that? And like getting verbal buy-in helps people feel comfortable speaking up, that kind of thing.
Verbal buy-in, that is good shit.
Yeah.
Glad that I turned
Start
the
taking
panel on
notes.
humor into a panel on safety tools. When I'm in the safety tools panel later, this can.
I mean, this section of the panel is best practices.
Yeah, it all gets in the same bucket eventually.
Yeah, the thing is that when your players feel safe with you, and humor is a great tool for building that safety, they are willing to go a lot more horrible places with you.
Yeah. I had a quick question, if you don't mind. Sasha, how many drinks do you have?
Just the 2.
Okay, all right. Because every time I look over, I see like a different glass. It's just curiosity, no judgment, judgment at all.
It's a trick I learned from someone I play Deadlands with, actually. Like, the more kinds of drink you have next to you, the happier you feel. And it works. It's good.
Oh, yeah, I've got my bourbon lined up for the vampire game later.
So this is also a great opportunity for all of us to share examples we would like to share of the, juxtaposing humor and horror, because I'm sure we've all got a million fun stories.
Oh boy.
Natalie, I'd be interested to hear from you. I mean, a lot of us have been super chatty.
Yeah. So
not to put you on the spot, I just wanted to give you the opportunity.
I was worried I already shared an example with my elephant. Like that whole campaign.
The tree. Tell the tree.
That's what I was going to tell. I think it's the scary thing I put on my players that has most resonated and I hear the most about. We ran on this adventure where they were going, it was very kind of like an Indiana Jones themed adventure where they were going through like this uncharted island and like trying to climb to the top. And they were attacked by kobolds on hang gliders, was like very like silly early on. And so they get to the top and they're there to pick like this special fruit from this orchard. And like in the center of the orchard is this tree with like these beautiful white flowers. And then as they get closer, they realize they're not flowers, they're teeth. And the whole tree like tries to bite them. And then eventually like the teeth flowers bloom into eyeball fruits that shoot like beholder rays at them. And I still get like comments about that. Like anytime I mention a tree in any of my adventures or
She told me a couple weeks ago as we were driving around the city before quarantining that, it's that time of year again. I was inspired to make a tree last year by all the trees blooming here on the street, which is right outside my window. So I have this constant reminder of the tooth tree. And I will forget my own name before I forget what it was like to fight this horrifying, screaming, eyeball-laden tooth tree.
Natalie, your game visuals are great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any fun examples?
I was thinking about this Outbreak game where we were trying to the zombie outbreak happened, and we were arguing the whole time about how to get how we were going to leave the city, and our characters were bickering, and we eventually went with their idea, not mine. And as we got there, my character was the first to die in the party, and everyone was so shocked. Everyone got completely quiet, and I like called over the character that I was bickering in, and like it was looking to be this like deep moment, and I looked them in the face and I said, "This is your fault," and I died. And it was so funny because it was like funny because like up until that line it was just so like shocking for everyone, because like I think it finally hit everyone how unforgiving Outbreak can be, and it just was so like everyone was mouth agape, and then I just like got my one last like quip and then died.
Now they'll miss you even more.
Yeah.
Excellent last words.
Yeah, always.
That's great.
Rick or Sasha, do you have any samples you want to share?
So I've run a lot of one-shots at conventions lately.
Yeah.
And when you put drugs...
You look so haunted.
When you put drugs on a character sheet for, someone who's like a drug dealer in a modern game, in a one-shot, that player is going to scour over their sheet and see it. And by golly, if it's there, they're going to use it. And I've had some crazy things happen with each person that's picked up that character sheet. It's like it's haunted. And they end up using it in ridiculous ways, like putting acid into pancake syrup. And like someone's legitimately trying to buy time, and they're having someone at a monastery make them pancakes. And it's like, my gosh, this guy's taking too long. He just keeps making me pancakes. I'm a vampire. I don't even eat food. I know what'll be a great idea. I'll just put acid in his syrup. That'll get him tripping, and then he'll leave me alone, and I can sneak out of here. And yeah, no, the whole table was in tears. We were laughing because like not only did he get this NPC completely high, but then he used like a mind-altering power on him. And yeah, of course, I'm the storyteller, so I have to be this NPC who's getting just completely abused. And yeah, we were all crying at the table. It was so funny. That gentleman's actually running games for us this weekend.
That's what happens. You go to play games.
Yeah.
As a player, and now you DM for them.
I like how you didn't mention their names, so the folks that are like seeing this and in those games are going to be like, is this acid pancake guy? Don't eat the pancakes. Don't anybody eat the goddamn pancakes.
I'm going to send this link to him when it's all over for video on demand.
Sasha and Jacob, do you guys have any fun stories you want to share?
Sasha, please.
I'm a bit sorry to do this, but not so sorry I'm not going to do it. I think one of the funniest horror games that I've ever played in is actually one that my company put out. So myself and my husband/writing partner, Johnny, we wrote a game called Dusk Hollow PD, which is kind of like a Lovecraftian cosmic horror game that's also at the same time like a Midsummer Murders game. So we actually did a one-shot as a podcast, as an actual play for Rusty Quill Gaming, or for Magnus Archives. It was a Rusty Quill podcast. And the whole thing in that one was we were investigating the murder of some rich landowner, I don't know, some rich person. And you play the cops basically that have been assigned to the case. And the whole thing was about this cult, and the whole cult ended up being train spotting based. So you just got these really great moments where you'd get this timetable that was full of cryptic codes, and you'd go to, you'd follow the leads, and then halfway through the game, instead of trying to code break these really cryptic things, you're talking to a steam train enthusiast who just won't shut up about models of steam train, and then by the end of it there's like some train spotter in an anorak trying to like hit you with a train whistle, and like covering their face with a train hat. And I just felt like the ramping up of that, from the really gruesome murder to the just least intimidating person in the world coming at you with a bit of railway spiking was really good, really worked. So go listen to that. It's in the Rusty Quill Magnus Archives feed, I think.
Excellent.
Was wondering why it was feeling so electric here. It's because there was a plug.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you.
I'm a bad person. If we were gonna have a good time later or a bad time later, I don't know how it's gonna go, man.
We got puns on puns.
Yeah, we do.
Dark Ages puns.
Did you have a story you wanted to share, Jacob?
I'm not a story so much of an experience. So I run vampire games and things just privately for some of my friends, and I take part in some online plays and things like that. But I got 2 players who I love very, very much, who cannot take anything seriously. Can't. But looked me dead in my eyes and were like, "We really want you to run vampire, and we want it to be gritty and dark and horrible." And I was like, "Cool. I'm gonna build this sandcastle for you, and it's gonna be great. I'm gonna weave in lore. It's gonna be subtle. We're gonna listen to music. I'm gonna set that mood. It's gonna be great." And then it's like 2 people just walking by with kazoos, kicking over the sandcastle, and rebuilding it. And I love them, and this is okay with me. Like, I'm fine with it because it's. I had to kind of like what Sasha said, is that establishing, because when they looked at me and said, "We want to play in a horror game," I, funnily enough and silly enough, thought they wanted a horror game. So I made a horror game. That's not what they wanted. They wanted a scary fun house that they could make fart noises in. So I had to pretty much adjust the game, and it's still a horror game. It has horror elements, but it's more of a comedy game. Not that I'm doing the comedy. I just shut up for about an hour and let them do bits, and then I introduced the next scary part, and then I shut up for about an hour, and then I let them do bits, and then it's me just like throwing some bitter chocolate while they're wolfing down cotton candy. And I love them, and I know they're watching this, and I hate them so much. But it's being to actually be a little bit serious, is making sure that you can adjust and making sure that everybody at the table kind of knows really what's up, and making sure that all the personalities and everything blend together. They're not actually anywhere near as bad as I just described. They are far worse, but making sure that you can kind of adjust, and making sure that you have, I cannot agree with what Sasha said enough, a horror game with funny parts to it, or a comedy with some creepy bits. Like, it's very difficult unless everybody agrees to walk that line together to try and do both. Yeah. But I love them, and they're terrible.
The best players are.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting how you all give examples about a tense situation or a tense environment that's like broken by something funny. Because my example that I immediately went to was the opposite. Just real quick, screaming like lichen moss thing, algae, goes screaming as an alarm when they pass it off. Has like 1 hit point, 1 hit kills it, shoo, so it hits the ground. That's funny. And then here comes around the corner that the alarm you set off is the shambling, reanimated, plant-infested corpse of your brother.
Oof.
Makes that hit a little harder after you just laughed at a screaming purple just melted off the wall.
Oh.
It might be a little evil. But we're about done on here, so let's just go around, tell everybody where you can find us again. Again, my name is Stephanie Allen. I'm from Charm Person Games. It's charmpersongames.com or charmpersongame, no S, on Twitter.
Okay.
Oh, you made a noise if you go next.
Yeah. I know. I was like, yeah. Hey, I'm Ify Nwadiwe. You can find me Ify Nwadiwe on Twitter and Instagram. Ifty's on Twitch, and every night on Twitch, I host a late night show called Super Punch. Check that out. It'll be good. We're actually about to go on hiatus, so I guess check it out this week and then in a month.
You want me to call on you again?
Natalie Pudim. I'm at Natalie_20 on Twitter, and I'm at CharmPersonGame on Twitter as well. If you're in the Baltimore area and interested in getting a game session, once this is all over, let us know.
Very good. I am Rick Def Malkavian on Twitter, and you can find me at Gehenna Gaming and anywhere that weird people are.
Sasha, please,
Jacob.
after you.
Okay, so I'm Sasha Sienna. You can find me on Twitter at Sienna Sasha, and you can find MacGuffin and Company at www.macguffinandcompany.com.
Nice. On Twitter, you can find me at Jacob Burgess VO, BURGESS. That is a soft G for a soft man, VO. Or makewordshappen.com is my personal website. If you want to find me in what I do with Yizbrid Games, that would be YSYB. It's Yizbrid Games. You can Google it. It's a Welsh word and it doesn't have vowels, and I can't spell it because I have a minor case of dyslexia. It's really weird, even though I've worked there and am the director of operations. Very professional. So I stream with them and host their channel every Tuesday and Thursday night. Twitch.tv/Yizbrid Games. Follow us and check out World of Horror, which we have offered up as a prize. We've got, I think, 5 codes turning in. I don't know if any of them have gone by because I was grocery shopping this morning. Yeah, that's what I'm about. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all being on the panel. Thank you everyone for watching, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of Virtual Horror Con.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie.